Drawing a corgi is easier than you think, and I'm going to show you exactly how you can do it, no matter your skill level. Hello wonderful people, it's Genevieve, and my goal here on this channel is to teach you all about illustration and design. So if you're new, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of the weekly videos, and so that you can join our wonderful creative community. And with that said, grab your drawing tools, and let's get started. For this demo, I'm going to be drawing in an app called Procreate on the iPad Pro, but you can follow along with pretty much any digital art software, even pencil and paper could work, because we're mostly going to be focusing on drawing this little guy here, so a character breakdown, and not so much about fancy techniques that would use very specific tools. That being said, if you are working in Procreate and if you want to have my illustration as a reference right here, the way to do that is going in the wrench icon menu at the top, and in the canvas submenu, activating the reference toggle, which is going to let you import a picture. So if you want to download my illustration along with the color palette that we're going to be using in this video, you can do so by going to the link in the description below. They're both totally free, but otherwise you can pick your own colors and you can use only the video as your reference. You definitely don't need this one if you don't want to have it, or if you're working with a different software. So we're going to start with just a very basic, super rough sketch of the main shapes of our character. So for that, we're going to create a new layer, and we're going to rename this layer to Sketch. Now I'm just going to hide my example here. And for the sketch, you can really use any color of your choice. We're not going to see in the final result, so it doesn't matter. I usually just sketch with a neutral gray. Now in this video, in terms of brushes, I'm always going to give you a few options. I'm going to suggest free brushes that come with Procreate and that you can totally use and get great results. I'm also going to give you tips on how to find similar brushes in different software, so if you're using, I don't know, Ibis Paint or Clip Studio, anything else. And I'm also going to be suggesting brushes that come from my Ultimate Illustration Bundle. Now these brushes are absolutely not essential, you can totally follow along without them, but they can help you save time and get more professional results because they're really super sensitive to the Apple Pencil. And they have a lot of texture within the brushes, so you can get really good results super quickly. Now if you want to check them out, they will be linked in the description below, and there's always a special promo code for the YouTube people, but again, they're really not essential. Now for the sketch, since we're not going to see in the final result, you can really pick any brush that you know you're comfortable with. If you don't have a favorite brush, that's okay. It could be in the sketching panel, so free brushes that come with Procreate, the HB pencil, that would be my recommendation. Or if you do have the illustration bundle, you could pick the sketching brush. Now if you're working in a different software, again, any brush that you know you like and you're comfortable with could totally work. And if you want to have something similar to what we are going to be using, just a brush that have pencil in the name should be totally fine. So we're going to start here by just mapping out the most basic shapes that are going to become the structure of our character. So we're going to start with the head, which is going to be just a pretty simple circle. Now we're going to take roughly the same size circle that we did for the head, and we're going to draw it for kind of the front of the body, so right under the head. Again, it really doesn't need to be precise. And we're going to draw another one slightly further back, which is going to be essentially the butt and the back. We're then going to add a few rectangles or square for the legs. So one at the very back, and two at the front. Great, so I think that we can zoom in and start refining these shapes to make them look more like a dog. So now we really have the basic shapes, the basic proportions. And so all we have to do is connect them and refine them a little bit. So we're going to start with creating the belly shape, which essentially is just going to be starting from the front circle that we have for the body. And we're just going to extend that curve a little bit like that. Then we're going to connect the back with the leg, so again, just kind of extending the curve that we already have. And we're going to add a few toes on the paws. We're going to do the same thing with the front, so we're just going to use this front circle again to help us map out the legs. So it's going to look a little bit like this. And once more, adding some little toes. Now the other leg is kind of behind, so we're not necessarily going to connect it with the body, but we're just going to refine the shape of it a little bit so it's less square. We're going to add a bit of a curve like this. And once more, a few little toes. From there, you can extend the circle, the front circle of the body to connect it with the head and mimic this line on the other side as well. So essentially, we're just thickening the top of the circle. Now for the head, I personally like to thicken the bottom, so making it a little bit more like this shape instead of just a circle, but you can totally experiment with different head shapes, and playing with different head shapes is a really good way of adding a different personality to your dog. So really feel free to experiment here. You could go with more of a triangle, you could go with a circle like we already have, or otherwise you could do like me and just thicken up the bottom, essentially adding some cheeks on the dog. Now before adding the facial features, we're going to draw what I call the plus sign, and that is a way to visualize the direction the head is facing. So we're going to start with just a slightly curved vertical line, and then a slightly curved horizontal line. From there you can place the nose pretty much in the intersection, and then add your eyes on the horizontal line. Now for this little guy's mouth, we're just going to draw one vertical line that starts from the bottom of the nose, and then we're going to draw a curved W for the mouth itself. So we're going to align the corners of the W with pretty much the middle of each eye, and then just connecting it with the middle. If you want, you can also draw a tongue, that makes it extra cute. And last but not least, we're going to draw the two super big ears, which for now are just going to be two pretty big rounded triangles on the top of the head. Now the great thing about doing a super quick rough sketch using basic shapes, it gives you a lot of freedom to first sketch everything super quickly so you're not wasting any time, but then go back in and play with the proportions and play with the position of everything to create a base structure that is going to be strong and is going to allow you to have an illustration that you like. So for example, I know my head is, well, at least I think it looks a little bit kind of too far on this side. So if I want to quickly bring it in, all I have to do is use a selection tool, and Procreate, the selection tool is right here at the top, and setting it to freehand so that I can quickly draw a selection around my basic shapes. And then using the arrow tool, I can just move these basic shapes around and just reposition them. I could also resize them. For example, if I want a bigger head, I can just put it right there. It's really easy because everything is just basic shapes at this point, and it's just a super rough sketch, so it's okay to kind of play around and just experiment with different shapes. So take all the time you need here to just play with your super rough sketch until you have a structure that you know you like, and then we're going to move on to the next step. We're going to create a line art from this crazy looking sketch. Great, so this was probably the hardest part of video, honestly, so if you made it this far, I'm sure you can get to the end. The next step is really just going to be tracing over the crazy lines that we have to pick which ones we actually want to use in the final illustration. And for that, you might want to lower the opacity of your sketch until you can just barely see it. I'm going to keep mine a little bit more opaque so you can see it in the example, but in your case, really lower it as much as you can until it just completely disappears. And then we're going to create a new layer, and we're going to rename this layer to line art. Now for the color of your line art, that's totally up to you. You could go with a pure black line art for everything. I like to have a line art that is darker versions of the different colors in my illustration, but we don't know what those colors are going to be just yet. Well, if you're using the color palette, you know, but if you're building your own illustration from scratch, at the stage of the line art, you might not even know what the colors are going to be yet, but that's really not a big deal. For now, just pick any color of your choice, and later in the video, I'm going to show you how to quickly recolor your line art, so the color that you pick right now doesn't really matter. As long as you can see it, you're good to go. But in my case, again, since I'm using the color palette that I shared with you, I already know which color I'm going to use for the line art. It is going to be this one right here, so kind of an orangey brown. And for the brushes that you might want to use for your line art, you have a bunch of options depending on the style that you want. I usually like my outlines to have a bit of texture and grit to them, so if you want to have that too, you could go in terms of free brushes in Procreate in the sketching pack, and switching from the HB pencil to the 6B pencil. It's just a little bit thicker and it's going to work better for outlines, at least in my opinion. If you're working with a different software, again, something that has pencil in the name should allow you to follow along just fine. And if you have the illustration bundle, you could switch to the outlines brush. And here really there's no right or wrong way to do this. We're just going to go over the lines that we want to use, trace them, and create a line art. So here I'm going to stop talking to let you focus on drawing your line art, but I'm going to keep my video going in the background so you can use it as a reference. And once we're done, we're going to meet in the next step, which is going to be adding the colors. Great, so at this stage we're essentially working with a coloring book, so it's going to be pretty easy from now on. We're going to start by just hiding your sketch to make sure that everything is there. At every step of the process, just take a moment to look at everything and see if there's anything you want to move, and if there is, go ahead and move it right now. Otherwise, we're going to start laying down the colors, and we're going to do that by first creating a silhouette of our dog. So we're going to create a new layer below the line art, and we're going to rename this layer to colors. Now here you can pick really any color of your choice. I'm going to go with a really nice burnt orange. You can see that it's quite light and pretty much middle of the road in terms of saturation. And here for the brush, we're just going to pick something that doesn't have any texture to it. So if you're working with Procreate with the free brushes, that could be in the airbrushing pack, the hard brush. If you're working in a different software, just pick any basic circle brush, just the most basic brush possible. And if you are working with the illustration bundle, you could pick the base round brush. And we're simply going to outline the entire dog and then fill in the outline to create a silhouette. And with that, it is time for the secret password. So if you've watched this far in the video, please go ahead and leave a comment with the word dog. I know it might sound a little bit crazy, especially if you're new on the channel, but it's a game that we play here. In every single illustration video, I had a secret password for you to find. And the secret password essentially does two things. It's really cool for me because you guys know me, you see my face in the intro, you hear my voice throughout the entire video, but I have no idea who you are. And whenever you leave a comment, no matter what the comment is, I get to sometimes see your face, sometimes see your names, and it's just really great to see who's part of the creative community that we're building here on the channel. So that's one thing, but probably the most important thing about the secret password is that it does give me a lot of insight into how to edit and pace my videos better, which helps me create better tutorials for you guys, and that's super important. So just go ahead and leave a comment with the word dog, and then we're going to keep going. Now before we add the cream color on the belly and the face, we might want to change the color of the background so we can actually see the cream a little bit better. So if you're working in Procreate, you can simply select the background color layer at the bottom of your list, otherwise just create a new layer, and you can really set this background color to whatever you want. I'm going to set it just to a bright teal, but I do have a video on how to draw a park background or a river background. I will link that description below if you want to check it out and put your dog into an actual, background. But for now, we're just going to set the background to teal, just so that we can see the cream color that we're going to paint on the dog. Now speaking of the cream color, go ahead and create a new layer and rename it to cream. Now if you wanted, you could go ahead and paint the cream directly on your dog silhouette color. I personally like to separate my layers as much as I can because that would mean, for example, if I want to erase a part of the cream, I could just go ahead and erase that layer and I would not need to repaint the colors or anything. The colors below it would still be fine. And by working on separate layers, you're also going to be able to use what is called clipping mask. So if you're working in Procreate, you can just tap on your cream layer and in the menu select clipping mask. Now what a clipping mask does is everything we draw on the cream layer is going to stay within the color silhouette that we have. So we can just quickly go over and brush the colors and it's going to stay within the dog shape. So that's super helpful. A lot of digital art software do have clipping masks, so you could just Google the name of your software and then clipping mask. If you're not exactly sure where to find them, you should get that information pretty quickly. That being said, if your software doesn't have clipping mask, it's really not a big deal. You're just going to have to be a little bit more careful to stay within the lines when you paint your cream color. Speaking of the cream color, if you're working in the color palette, it is this one right here. Otherwise, as you can see, it's just a much brighter version of the base color. And for the brushes here, you have a few options. Once more, if you're working with free Procreate brushes, you could pick in the charcoal pack, the Willow Charcoal. If you're working with a different software, any brush that has charcoal in the name should be totally okay. And if you're working with the illustration bundle, I would recommend using the basic texture brush. And here all you have to do is just paint your cream color wherever you want. So before moving on to adding colors to the facial features, we're going to add a bit of texture and color variation to the orange part. So we're going to create a new layer once more. We're going to rename it to extra colors, something like that. And we're going to put it between the cream and the color layer. Now it should automatically get applied as a clipping mask, but if it doesn't, you can just tap on it and select clipping mask. And with the same brush, we're just going to quickly paint some slightly different versions of the orange. So you could either color pick your orange and manually change it towards a little bit more of a yellow color, or if you're using the color palette, selecting this super bright orange right here, and using it to paint over the top of the ears, the top of the head, and the top of the back. Now we're going to do the same thing, but this time with an orange that is a little bit more red. So once more, you could just color pick your base color and then make it a little bit more red. Or if you're working with the color palette, it's going to be this one right here. Now this one, we're going to use it to paint towards the bottom part of the head and the bottom part of the belly and the back leg. Now we're also going to draw the facial features. So for those, you can create a new layer once more, renaming it to facial features. Now it might seem like it's pointless to apply it as a clipping mask because the facial features are not going outside the shape anyway, but for the next step, which is going to be shading, we're going to need the shadows to stay within the shape, so that's important. The facial features are also applied as a clipping mask, but I'm getting ahead of myself. For the facial features, we're going to just zoom in a little bit, and then we're going to pick a nice dark brown. If you're working in the color palette, it's going to be this one right here. Otherwise, you can see it's just a very, very dark version of our base color. And we're going to use it to paint both the eyes and the nose. Next, we're going to move on to the tongue. So for the tongue, we're going to pick a nice bright pink. The exact pink doesn't matter that much, but you can see it's really super, super light and pretty much middle of the road in terms of saturation. So that's pretty good, but our dog looks a little bit scary and not super alive right now, so we're going to add some highlights in the eyes and the nose. And for that, we're just going to pick pure white. And simply adding some dots in the eyes. You could add either 1 per eye or 2 per eye. That's really totally up to you. And we're also going to add a nice little line at the top of the nose. Now we're almost ready to shade, which is going to really make this piece come together and really pop. But before that, we might want to recolor our outlines. Now there are a few different ways to do it. My favorite technique is activating what is called alpha lock on the line art layer. So if you're working in Procreate, you just take 2 fingers and you swipe your layer towards the right, which is going to activate alpha lock. You could also manually activate it from the menu, so just tapping on layer and selecting alpha lock. And what that does is now everything we draw on the line art layer is going to stay within the lines that we already have, which means we can just quickly go over with a different color to recolor some sections of the line art. Now, if you don't have alpha lock in your software, it's really not a big deal. You can just use your selection tool and draw a selection around the different parts that you want to recolor, and then drop a color on top of those. And again, here you can really use any color of your choice for your outlines. I like to go, like I was saying, with darker versions of the different colors I have. So you could just color pick a color from your dog and then make it darker. But if you're working with the color palettes, a quick tip for you is that usually I set the darker color to the right of the base color. So for example, the cream color we use is this one, which means the darker version for the outline would be right here. For the tongue, it would be this one, and for the eyes, it would be this one right here. So that's just a little tip. Otherwise, you can just color pick and manually make the colors darker for sure. The exact colors really don't matter at this stage. It's totally a question of personal preference. Now I'm personally going to pick this one right here, and then you can just brush over to quickly recolor the outlines that are around the cream color. You can do the same thing for the tongue, so just picking a darker version of the pink and brushing around the tongue. You can pick an even darker version of your dark brown and paint around the eyes, around the nose, and maybe the mouth as well. Now if you have any little drawings around your dog, like here I have the heart, you could also recolor them to whatever color you want. I'm just going to go with pure white for my hearts. So take all the time you need here to recolor your outlines. As you can see, you really don't need to be precise in any way. And once you're done with that, we're going to move on to shading. Now I know adding shadows and light can be a bit intimidating if you're not super used to it, but I'm going to show you a very quick and easy way to do it. We're going to create a scrap layer. You don't need to rename it because it really doesn't matter. And on this layer, we're going to draw roughly where our light source is going to be. Now you can put the light source wherever you want. I'm going to have mine be here, I guess. And from there, we're going to draw the rays of lights that are going to be hitting your character. So once you have your light source and all the rays, we're going to create the real layer that we're going to use for the shadows. So just a new layer. And this one, we want to make sure that it is below the line art. And we also want it to be applied as a clipping mask onto the base color so that the shadows stay within the dog. Now, as you can see, mine automatically got applied as a clipping mask when I placed it on top. But if it didn't for you, you can just tap on the layer and then activate clipping mask. And we're going to rename this layer to shadows. And here you could go in and pick darker versions of all the different colors and paint your shadows that way. That would totally work, but it is a little bit time consuming. So instead of doing that, I personally suggest you use what is called blending modes. Now, I'm not going to get into all the details about blending modes. I have a full video about those if you want to learn really how they work and what they do. But essentially what they do is they take one layer, in our case the shadow layer, and they take all the colors on the shadow layer and blend them with the color behind it, which means we can just pick one color for the shadows, paint all the shadows, and they are going to adapt to the colors under, which is really super handy. So we're going to set the shadow layer to the blending mode linear burn. So if you're working in Procreate, you can just tap on the little N next to the check mark, and then select linear burn from the list, and lower the opacity, probably around 50% for now, but we can always come back and tweak it later. And for the color we're going to pick for shadows, that's totally up to you. The only thing I would suggest is not going with a neutral gray or a black, because then your shadows are going to look super muddy and it's just not as fun. So just adding a bit of a tint is going to make a world of difference. I usually have my shadows be a purplish gray, something like that. And we're going to stick with the same brush we've been using, so a charcoal brush or the basic texture brush. And we're just going to start from the light source, follow a ray, and whenever the ray hits a body part, we're going to add a shadow below that body part. So for example, here we can see the head is going to cast a shadow on the body. And then we just repeat this step, so we just follow the rays until it hits a body part, and then we had a shadow below that body part. So if you have the same light source as I do, we're going to have a shadow on this front leg right here from the body. Maybe a little bit here because there's a fold. We're going to have a shadow on this back leg for sure. And we're also going to have some shadows inside the ears. Now that's a pretty good start for shadows, but our character still looks flat. And the reason for that is that there are multiple kinds of shadows. So the shadows we just painted are what are called cast shadows. So shadows that are cast by one object being in front of another one. But there is also another kind of shadow that is called form shadow. So if we look at the belly here, for example, If we follow this ray, there is nothing casting a shadow on the belly, but the belly is curving away from the light, which means at one point the light is just not going to be able to reach. So to show that, we're just going to add a super soft shadow on the belly, starting from the bottom and then creating a gradient towards the middle of the belly. We're also going to do that with the bottom of the feet. We're going to have that effect on the bottom of the head as well. Now, without getting into all the details about the different kind of shadows, one tip to keep in mind is that cast shadows tend to have really well-defined edges, but form shadows tend to be much softer, so they blend in the shape. So feel free to pause the video here if you need more time to add shadows on your dog. Otherwise, we're going to add a shadow on the ground, and for that, we're going to create a new layer, and we're going to put this layer below the dog, so below the color layer, and we're going to rename it to ground shadow. And for the ground shadow, we're going to use the same blending mode, so we're going to set it to linear burn, and once more we're going to lower the opacity for now around 50%. Now the ground shadow is essentially a cast shadow, so the dog is casting a shadow on the ground, so you can just follow your light rays, and when it hits the dog, under the dog you just paint a very loose shadow. Now before moving on to the highlights, you might actually want to delete the light source layer that we created, because otherwise it's going to be a bit too confusing. And then we're going to create a new layer right below the line art and above the dog shadows. And we're going to rename this layer to lights. We also want the lights to stay within the base color, so we're going to apply it as a clipping mask. And we're going to use a blending mode as well, so that we don't have to change the color of the light as we go. And here we're going to use a blending mode called Add. Now Add is very strong, so you probably want to lower the opacity quite a lot, probably around 20-30% for now, but we're going to play with it at the end. And you can use any bright color you want for your lights. I usually go with a bright yellow to make it look like it's the sun, but you could experiment with different options. And we're going to stick with the same brush we've been using for the last few steps, so charcoal or basic texture brush. And to add lights and highlights, you have so many different techniques. The one I use all the time is what I've come to call outlining your outlines. So essentially at this point, we're not even thinking of the character as much in terms of volume, so we're not trying to show 3D with light. We're just trying to make the character pop a little bit more from the background. So what that means is we're going to go over and look at all the different body parts, and we're just going to add a line of light following the outline whenever that body part is facing the light source. So if you remember, my light source was roughly here, which means I'm going to add lights, for example, on the top of the ear and the top of the head. So as you can see, it's super simple. It just takes a few seconds, but it really helps the character pop from the background. So you're just going to go over your entire character and outline the outlines that are facing the light source. And once you've painted all your lights and your shadows, feel free to go back and play with the opacity of all of those layers, so the lights and the shadows layer, and just play with the slider, play with the number until you're happy with the result. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn how to paint a park background for your dog, I highly recommend you check out this tutorial in which I'm going to teach you exactly how to paint your background. But before you leave, make sure to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the weekly videos. Then click on the link right here and I'll meet you there.